The April 8 work session of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Burcham, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Freiling.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons is absent. Mr. Zhang.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons is a bit under the weather this afternoon. He was going to try to soldier through and be here for the meeting, but it doesn't appear as though he will make it. So, moving on, we have 4 items for City Council meeting of April 11, 2019. Mr. Trivette, anything you'd like to preview for us?
We have 3 public hearings that are dealing with the city budget. The first is the budget, the second is the tax levy, and then the third is the utility budget and its utility rate. And then we move right into the regular calendar. The city manager report will be an update on the neighborhood balance work group GIO. And then there are 4 items under the new business category, the first of which is sort of a housekeeping issue that gives us more flexibility in the human services division. The next is updating the city code to match the state code as it deals with licensing for distilleries and on-premise retailers for beer and alcohol. Next, we have a budget amendment to accept some anticipated revenues for grants. And then the last item is, again, updating the city code to match state code as it relates to the method for mailing and collecting updates for personal property tax returns.
Questions for Mr. Trivette? With that, we'll open the public comment section of the meeting. If anybody would like to address council on any of the issues being covered at our Thursday meeting, we'd be happy to hear from you now. Seeing no one come forward, we'll move on to background presentations and discussion. The first is a presentation and update on the activities of the Greater Peninsula Workforce Board. We have William H. Mann, Jr., Executive Director, and John Olsen, EDD, Chair.
Mr. Mayor, I'm pleased to introduce our 2 representatives. Dr. Olsen just stepped forward, and he's the president of the Greater Peninsula Workforce Board, followed by the executive director, William Mann. Dr.
Thank you,
Olsen.
sir. I'm the chair, not the president. One day, maybe. But
well, it's always better to promote you upwards.
There we go. We like that. I'm the president for the ECPI University in Newport News, so that's where that came from. So we'll go with that. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for allowing us to appear before your group today. And what we're going to do is just kind of give you a brief overview in terms of the Greater Peninsula Workforce Board. Again, my name is John Olsen. That's Mr. Mann over there. He'll kind of wrap up and give the good background here. And first here, let's see, sorry, get to the presentation here. There we go. One more. There you go. The Greater Peninsula Workforce Board is one of 15 local area boards across the state of Virginia. You'll notice in the map up there, you have it in front of you, is we're comprised of the cities, counties of the Greater Peninsula area. You'll also notice we also include Gloucester as part of our Workforce Board area. So, and the basic vision and mission of the Workforce Board is to go ahead and be the regional catalyst for discussions dealing with economic development and workforce development. Our goal is to bring both employers, agencies together and have a discussion in terms of what we need to do to help with the workforce issues that confront our local community. And this just gives you an idea of membership from the Williamsburg area. Mr. Maslin now serves on the board as our LEO. Mr. Zhang has been on our board before as the LEO. And then you've got Mr. Tingle also serves on our board, and Mr. Stone with Walmart. And with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Mann, and he will take it from there.
It's a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. We wanted to go ahead and share a little information about the board's work and some of the things that we're involved with, various projects and such. What you see, and you do have the handout with all the PowerPoint slides in front of you, is our Virginia Career Works Hampton Center. Under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which provides the funding for most of what we do, each local workforce development area is required to have at least one brick and mortar comprehensive one-stop center. And this is the facility through which we provide the majority of our programs and services for adults and dislocated workers. Dislocated worker being an individual who was formerly employed, but through no fault of their own is no longer employed, and the prospects of them going back to what they were doing before are not real good. So we're working with folks who were laid off as a result of plant closures, reductions in force, and that sort of thing. And this is the facility through which we're able to deliver a variety of services. At this particular center, and what you see there at the top where it says welcome, we have, of course, classroom space. The slide immediately underneath that shows you the reception area where we have staff who can meet and greet and work with all the individuals that are coming into the facility for services. And a very important part of what we have there are the computer banks where individuals can come and access these computers to find out about employment opportunities, educational programs, a variety of services to help them plan what it is they want to do to help move them from where they're at to where they need to be. Now, in terms of the staff that we have working in this particular facility, we partner with all of the other state agencies that are involved in workforce development. The Virginia Employment Commission, Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, and of course the Department of Social Services or Human Services throughout our entire service delivery area are also partners with us in providing these services for eligible adults and dislocated workers. What we do is to provide labor market information, assessment activities, employability planning, counseling, case management, academic and occupational skills training, supportive services, placement, assistance, and follow-up. So it's a full menu program of services, and we rely on our partners to help flesh out these various activities and such that we can use the training dollars that we receive for those academic and occupational skills trainings program. Our goal is to improve job and career options for our region's workers and job seekers by utilizing both our public and private funds, and I have a slide that'll show you how that is all brought together, to put together a integrated, job-driven public workforce system that links the needs of area employers to developing the skilled workforce to help meet their needs for talent in our particular area. And what we're after is to develop a strong and vibrant regional economy where businesses thrive and people want to live and work. Now, I'm going to digress for just a second for this particular presentation, because one of the things that we're also involved with, and I just want to mention this, is the program that the Human Services Department is leading here in Williamsburg in cooperation with York County and James City County, Thomas Nelson Community College, and ourselves, the Historic Triangle Pathways to Independence Project Employ. We are also partnering with that effort to provide services to our TANF VIEW population. And we think that's really an important part of what we're doing through the services that we have available with the one-stop system. Now, in addition to services for adults and dislocated workers, the board also has a contract with New Horizons Regional Education Center to provide various skills training and occupational training activities for eligible youth. And again, we're looking at youth that are generally low income but have one or more barriers to employment that need to be addressed in terms of preparing them for entry into the labor force. And what we have through New Horizons is a program that begins with career exploration and guidance, continued support for educational attainment, opportunities for skills training in in-demand industries and occupations. And what we want to achieve is putting them on the path to good employment opportunities that are coupled with post-secondary educational programs that they can take advantage of. Now, one of the things that we recognize, excuse me, our brick and mortar one-stop course is located on the campus of Thomas Nelson Community College down in Hampton on Butler Farm Road. And so we've employed a network of what we call SNAP sites, shared network access points, to deliver services out into various communities. And one of the ones that we have in this network is the Williamsburg House of Mercy St. Bede's Outreach Center. The idea is to bring outreach, recruitment, assessment services into the community to make these things accessible to individuals. Again, recognizing when you look at the geography of the peninsula, it's very long and it can be very difficult for folks to get from up here down to there. And so we try to bring these services out into the community. And of course, this is part and parcel of conversations that I know have been going on between Williamsburg and James City County, looking at how could we perhaps create a satellite facility somewhere up here in the days ahead. And that conversation is still very much alive and going on. What we're doing, though, of course, is providing our services through this outreach center. We also have itinerant staff that come out during the month from the Virginia Courier Works facility down in Hampton. They appear over at the James City County Human Services facility twice a week, and also Literacy for Life. And so again, between this operation at the St. Bede's Outreach and then the scheduled itinerant staff visits to these two facilities, we try to bring services up into the Upper Peninsula for Williamsburg residents as well as James City County and Upper York. Now, I mentioned funding earlier, and this particular slide gives you a sense of how we are funded in terms of both public dollars as well as private. And as you can see, the vast majority of that pie chart, $4.1+ million, is under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA. And of course, I'm sure as you all know, for every federal dollar, there is a stack of regulations about this thick that goes along with it that tells us what we can and can't do with those federal monies. You can also see that we receive local per capita up there, the $255,000+ as well as other funding, private funding that we receive through grants, private sector contributions, and we also receive funding from our one-stop partners to help defray the cost of operations down on Butler Farm Road. But the vast majority of that money is, as you can see, federal. Now, as I said, under those federal dollars, we serve youth, adults, and dislocated workers. And not everyone who needs workforce assistance or development services falls within that particular one of those eligibility categories. And so the local per capita that you see up there, as well as the other, allows us to reach a much broader population than what we would be able to reach with just those federal dollars. So while the federal dollars make up the majority of our funding, those local per capita funds and other private contributions are very important to the board to achieve the work that we have before us. Now, in terms of the local per capita, we thought you'd be interested in seeing how that falls out. And you can see Williamsburg is in the gold section of the pie up there. And you can see the contributions that come from the other 6 localities that make up our service delivery area. And of course, this is based upon population, and so Hampton and Newport News deliver or provide the largest part of that particular pie that you see right there. Now, in terms of the services that we provide, this particular slide shows you services for businesses and services for job seekers. We really have 2 customers when you look at workforce development. Again, we're here to meet the needs of the employer community, but also the needs of the job seekers. And we tend to view the employers as our primary customer group, if you will, the consumer of our product. Our product being the trained, skilled, and credentialed workers that we enroll in our programs to help provide them with the in-demand occupational skills that we know the employer community is looking for. Now, when you're working with employers, it's important to recognize that employers really don't worry about geographic boundaries or jurisdictional boundaries. What they worry about is having a skilled workforce. And so this past September, the Greater Peninsula Workforce Board and our colleagues on the other side of Hampton Roads, which is the Hampton Roads Workforce Council, signed a resolution where we have committed to working together as one system to meet the needs of employers throughout the greater Hampton Roads region. We didn't want to have a situation where an employer would have to guess, do I work with the Peninsula folks or do I work with the Southside Hampton folks? We have one business services unit and we speak with one voice of the business community, and we're trying to make this as easy as we can for them to access the dollars that we have to provide the trained workforce that they require. And so we're working very closely together. This is really the first of its kind in the Commonwealth where you've got two boards who have come together, not merged, but are collaborating for the delivery of these services. And we've gotten a lot of positive attention from the governor's office in Richmond. They're watching this effort very closely. And so a lot of what we're doing is going into this particular effort to make sure we're meeting the needs of the businesses. And by working with them, it informs our work with the job seekers so we know what to provide them. Now, these are the numbers that we presently have for the current program year that we're in. You can see we've highlighted Williamsburg. The difference between registrations and participants would be individuals who have come to the One Stop and have accessed various services short of enrollment in a training program. And so you can see this takes you through February of this current program year. The year will end at the end of June. We operate on a July 1, June 30 basis. Now, this only tells part of the story. We just recently completed an event that we hold on an annual basis called the Youth Career Expo. And this is where we work very closely with the 6 school divisions here within our service delivery area, providing them the opportunity to learn more about educational programs and, very importantly, career opportunities here within our area. We're very concerned about ensuring that our young people know what these opportunities are, so they're willing to stay when they complete their education here in our area and become part of our labor pool. And so we run this Youth Career Expo, and we provide a program of mock interviews, various exhibits where employers come to demonstrate what they're doing, what their manpower needs happen to be, and give them a chance to talk with the young people about what the career opportunities are that we have available in this area. We just recently completed this year's Career Expo in March, and we had about 150 youth from the Williamsburg, James City County School Division participate in that. So that would be added to the numbers that you see right here. Now, in addition to the stack of regulations that we have as far as the federal dollars are concerned, we are also very much performance driven. And on this particular slide, you can see the performance criteria that have been established under the federal regulations for our adult population, our dislocated workers, and youth. And you can see they're pretty much the same thing. In terms of the actual measures, there's some important things here that I wanted to point out to you. And the first is that the employment measures are looking at not the point of termination when someone completes their training, but second quarter and fourth quarter after they would have exited our program. What we're interested in is making sure that this is not a revolving door training program. We want folks to come in and go through proper assessment, counseling, case management, employability planning, so we put them on a firm career pathway that's consistent with their interest and their skill sets and such. And so we're very much interested in not only helping them be able to obtain employment, but we want to make sure that they retain employment and that they can continue on from the start that we can afford them through these various programs. Now, the way this is laid out, you can see the programs, the measure descriptions, the negotiated level. Every year we have to negotiate performance standards with the state, and these were our performance negotiated levels for the 2017 program year. In the next column over, you see our actual performance, and then you can see the percentage that we achieved of the negotiated level. And in all cases, with the exception of one, we exceeded all of our negotiated levels. And on that last one, where you're looking at youth credential attainment, that 86.6% actually met the standard. The regulations said that if you met 80% of your negotiated level, they considered that a success. And so we've had a successful year for 2017, and we've had successful years running ever since the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act became law back in 2001. Now, behind all the numbers, there are real people. And what you have here is one of our success stories. And I won't read this to you, but essentially, it's really important to recognize that All the work we do is to prepare individuals with various needs and barriers, hopes, ambitions, and aspirations to achieve those goals and help put them on a path that leads to really good career opportunities, family-sustaining wages, fringe benefits, and really help them begin to move forward to achieve their goals. One of the things that I really enjoy about my job is the chance I get to attend various graduations. And you get an opportunity to see the success that these individuals have achieved. And this is quite an event. Folks come out with their families, their parents, their grandparents and such. And it's really a very rewarding experience to see the work that has gone into providing these programs result in this individual moving forward with their dreams and their ambitions and achieving some degree of success. And so this is one of the stories about a lady here in Williamsburg, laid off at Martin's, was able to pursue a career in healthcare and achieve her goals, and we were very pleased to be able to be part of that success story. That concludes our presentation this afternoon. You do have copies of our annual report along with copies of the slides. Be glad to respond to any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mann, and also Dr. Olsen for being here today. Let me begin by saying that workforce development and investment by its local governments is incredibly important for this region, predominantly because we are in a tourism industry, and there's a lot of potential for folks who want to seek maybe another career path, and that these programs actually make it possible. It's a whole network, right? You mentioned Literacy for Life is another local nonprofit that works. So the partnership, the collaboration, and the investment by the local dollars is incredibly important in this area. Also, not to say Dr. Olsen, having the pleasure of working with the board, you've got two great folks here who've steered leadership with transition efforts. You have Mr. Mann, who is a titan in his field. You told me you were working here since 1977, which is incredible, way before I was ever born, so, or even a thought. Let me begin by, if you don't mind, going to slide 12. It's the participant numbers. So I'm curious, you broke down how the per capita investments are made, besides the federal WIOLA dollars. And I see that for Williamsburg, the total registrations for this period is 61. And then there's for total registrations, and there's 4 with adults. I'm curious, kind of to what you were speaking before, you may have quickly highlighted on this, but I'm curious, how do you guys spread the word, especially with the New Horizons programs for trying to attract folks who are, who are low served? How do you necessarily reach these audiences?
We reach them through our partners primarily.
So word of mouth.
Human Services, New Horizons, word of mouth. Thomas Nelson, myself, I serve on the Williamsburg James City County. It's a 21st century CTE advisory body as well. So we're very much involved with all of our partners in getting the word out into the community about the various programs that we have. And New Horizons does a really good job for us as far as the youth are concerned and such. Likewise, through the Youth Career Expo, we get the word out through that particular mechanism as well.
Right, and I seem to recall before I came on this council that there used to be a physical location on John Tyler Highway. I'm just curious because I don't really know what the numbers are in comparison with the ones who present here today. Would it be safe to say that registrations have fallen off since the closing of that site?
Yeah, very much so. With grant-funded programs, Congress giveth and Congress taketh away.
Right.
And so as dollars come and go, that's been a problem in terms of maintaining a facility. And not just for ourselves. The facility, the last one we were in over at Williamsburg Crossing was a Virginia Employment Commission office, and those folks have been taking a real beating in terms of federal support, federal financing.
And I'm sure the interest hasn't waned, so is it more about transportation difficulties from getting to Williamsburg, to the Peninsula, to the Hampton work site? I don't know, do you guys provide surveys to folks, to these participants, and kind of gauge, what are some of the challenges to participating in these programs.
Right. Through our outreach effort with our itinerant staff that comes up here, as well as individuals who make it down to Butler Farm Road, we do surveys with them to find out what are the barriers to accessing these services so we can improve what we're doing and make sure that they can become involved in these various programs.
Right, and we appreciate your ongoing efforts with Mr. Wallentishere and collaborating with Thomas Nelson. Not sure if there's anything that could be said about that today, but sincerely appreciate the ongoing efforts with that discussion right there.
Well, we've had a very long and very productive work history with Mr. Wallentish and Human Services, and we will miss him a great deal.
Just very quickly, Mr. Zhang, the focus of the new grant will include those citizens who are under 200% of the federal poverty level, which means if I'm a single individual and I'm making about $25,000 or less, I would be eligible for some of the training provided.
Right.
Which broadens the number of people that could be served considerably.
Right, and continues to improve.
And we're doing that up here.
Right. One last question.
Sure.
So the governor, when he just started out his term, he elevated a cabinet position that focuses on economic development. This is right before I transitioned out, and Councilmember Maslin joined in. They wanted to consolidate the workforce development. They started this new branding program called Virginia Career Works. So how has that affected or impacted any efforts by the current council? Besides, you mentioned the Southside collaboration effort,
right,
which obviously has garnered good praise from the governor's office, but is there anything that we should, as local government, should be aware of as these efforts are ongoing?
The branding that went on, along with the new logo, which is kind of that interesting stylized cardinal, we weren't quite sure what it was when we first saw it, has helped to brand the system from one end of the Commonwealth to the other, that there is a public workforce system, that it does employ a variety of partners, and it helps to establish an identity for the system. And the idea is that we will have uniform, high-quality services anywhere you see the Virginia Career Works brand name and logo, which hopefully will do a couple of things: increase market penetration in working with area businesses, as well as increase repeat contacts with the business community, so that when they're looking for skilled, talented, credentialed employees, they're going to come to the public workforce system, where we can work together with our partners and get individuals that are not in the labor market employed.
Well, thanks for lending your insight today, and thanks for answering the questions. And I did see on my calendar that you guys are hosting your 4th annual home-based conference at the Hampton site this Friday. So for anyone who's interested, just check out the website. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And I would like to thank you as well for the presentation, and also just for all of the work done for this invaluable resource. I don't think I can add to what Benny said very well, as far as all of the benefits to the community. And so thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions.
Thank you. I was going to ask you to highlight the branding, but Benny covered that. What about talk a little bit about how you work with the local Chamber of Commerce groups?
We, members of the Chamber of Commerce well, the Chamber plays a number of roles. Let me start there. The Board of Directors must be a majority from the private sector business folks, and they must be nominated by the business community. And so the Chamber, both the Williamsburg Area Chamber as well as the Virginia Peninsula, play a very important role in making nominations to the board from the business community. Both of the heads of the Chamber are actually members of the board themselves. And so we work very closely with them. Right now we're engaged in a program that's looking at making the local business community more aware of a very important source of skilled labor in our area, and that's the transitioning service members. And so we've been working closely with all of the military installations, the commands that we have throughout our area, as well as the chambers and the business community, to help inform folks about the various programs in place that coordinate and collaborate with the transition assistance programs to help the transitioning service members know what the employment opportunities are here in our area, and hopefully encourage them to consider staying when they leave the uniformed services. So we're very much involved in that effort right now with them. We'll be looking, of course, to backfill the current position that Karen Riordan filled on our board with one of the, Ms. Banez, I believe it is, yes, who was recently appointed to backfill that position, so we have that representation again. But when you look at the work of the various chambers, the Tourism Alliance, in terms of what they're looking to achieve to ensure the success of local businesses and help to ensure that we have a solid economy. We share similar goals with them in terms of making sure that our private sector has the skilled labor that they need in order to be successful with whatever segment of the local labor market economy that they're involved in.
Thank you.
I just add my thanks to that of my colleagues for the work that you do, and I have two questions.
Sure.
As the unemployment rate fluctuates up or down, does that impact the types of assistance that you provide to workers, or at least the mix of types of assistance that you provide, or does that stay steady throughout a changing economy?
I would say, given the target groups that we have, it stays fairly constant in terms of looking at programs that focus on soft skills as well as hard occupational skills. And soft skills have become more important, and I would have to say that's been pretty constant throughout the various programs that we've administered over the years. The ability to communicate, problem solving, show up on time, be part of a diverse team, a variety of things that really help to round out an individual's. Employers have told us that if you can teach the soft skills, we can take care of the hard skills, the occupational skills. So that's been fairly constant. The thing that concerns me primarily about the rise and fall of unemployment rates is that when you look at those federal dollars, it's based upon a formula, and one of the factors in that formula is unemployment. And as unemployment rates drop, then the funding that the states receive to support their local boards drops as well. And so right now we're in a situation where at the national level, the funding for what will be the new program year beginning July the 1st has been held harmless at current levels. However, given Virginia's rather low rate of unemployment, they'll get a smaller share of that national pie, which means then the local boards will likewise get a smaller share to work with in the upcoming program year. So unemployment is something we watch very closely.
And you don't have to go back to the slide, but it was on slide 8. You mentioned that House of Mercy is a shared network access point.
Yeah.
But I believe you also said that you were looking for a satellite.
There's been conversations between Mr. Maslin and Mr. Eisenhower in regards to looking at the possibility of finding a facility up here in the Williamsburg, James City, York County area where some of these services that we have down on Butler Farm Road could likewise be housed and provide regular services Monday through Friday. It's a matter of finding the right facility in the right location, as well as putting our hands on the dollars that we would need in order to support that. So this is a conversation that we've been having. Likewise, just recently, Dr. Olsen and myself were in Washington attending the National Association of Workforce Boards conference. And we did a little investigating about mobile one-stop centers. And a number of our colleagues around the country have purchased these vehicles where much of the outreach, recruitment, assessment, employability planning services can be delivered, as well as training through computers that are housed inside these vehicles. And you can move them around in various locations to help meet the needs of the individuals that we're looking to serve. And so we're looking at a variety of ways of improving what we're doing to help individuals better access the services that we can provide.
If we are successful in establishing this satellite office, would you see that complementing or taking the place of the SNAP?
I would say probably complement it.
Because I could also see where there's value in having these services available within the framework of House of Mercy because of the other services that they're able to provide.
Absolutely, right.
Probably some
Right.
cross-pollination there. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much.
All
We
right, well,
appreciate
thank you. I appreciate it.
This takes us to our second background presentation today, which is a presentation by AVAdventure regarding the 2019 William and Mary Global Film Festival. And today we have Liz Sykes and Adam Stackhouse and our resident film festival expert, Barbara Ramsey.
Hi, thank you for having us. Can you fast forward for us? Okay, thank you. There we are. All right, so we are here to talk about the funding we received for the 2019 Global Film Festival. And with the $25,000, we allocated the vast majority to marketing. And so that was focused on putting ads in print and digital publications, social media campaigns, signage for the venues, and print materials for the event. The rest of the funding was used towards programming, and that primarily went to special guests, their travel and fees, screening fees for the films shown at the festival, and the venue rental. So you can see the positive momentum over the past 3 years. This year, we had a huge jump in attendance, which we were very excited about, primarily because of the marketing campaign, as well as adding a third venue, which was Tucker Theater. Tickets were free to William and Mary students again this year, so we saw an increase from last year in students taking advantage of that opportunity. And our workshops were free to both William and Mary students and the general public, and offered at about the same level as last year, with the majority of presenters being William and Mary alumni working in the arts and entertainment industry.
Regarding some specifics with the marketing, ads were placed in the listed publications here, including print ads and digital online ads. There was also story content covering the guests and the programming, and the Gazette, the Daily Press, the Flat Hat. A lot of what we were trying to do with the marketing for this festival was to bring folks from out of town for a multi-night visit to experience the festival as a Williamsburg event, go to restaurants, see the town. To that extent, we had marketing throughout the state, including over social media, especially Facebook and Instagram, targeted ads. We did geo-targeted campaigns in the cities listed here. The geo ads included the kind of ads that come up on your cell phone or computer when you're researching what to do in this part of the state from a vacation standpoint, or if you enter within the geo fence of the greater Williamsburg area, be it you're passing through or in it, the festival would come up and say, hey, here's the thing you can do, and it would push towards special hotel offers we'll talk about in a second. Roanoke is of particular note. That represents a geo-targeted campaign we did as sponsored by the Hotel and Motel Association of Williamsburg. It was picked as a location that was close enough in state that you could drive and kind of have a weekend destination getaway, but far enough that you would stay for one or more nights in a local hotel. The click-through rates and further stats on this, I believe, are in your reports. So we were very happy with the numbers on the click-throughs. I think Roanoke was like 0.9, which is very high for these kinds of ad campaigns.
Ticket sales were done online through Eventbrite and through the Kimball Theater box office. And for online purchases, we did capture a billing address for attendees, and 23% of the purchasers were from outside of Williamsburg. You can see the cities represented there in the list. For tickets purchased at the Kimball Theater box office, we did not capture billing information, so we're not sure where those attendees were coming from. But we were very pleased with the online response in ticket sales. For hotel bookings, as Adam mentioned, we partnered with the Williamsburg Hotel and Motel Association. And through that partnership, 8 businesses offered discounted rates, which were promoted on the festival website. We had 31 bookings from the general public during the festival weekend, and the festival itself booked 21 rooms for festival guests and alumni presenters. So combined, that resulted in about $10,000 in bookings during the festival here in Williamsburg.
We once again worked with Williamsburg area businesses to offer special promotions at restaurants, this year for the first time with the Williamsburg Area Restaurant Association, who extended the offer to all of their membership. All of the restaurants seen here all offered a special promotion unique to the festival weekend, encouraging guests to visit their establishment. Of special note are the Chef Dave Everett establishments, the Blue Talon, the Trellis, the Dog Street Pub, and Culture Cafe. We worked with them on a special promotion where a physical card promoting both the restaurant and the festival was placed in the bill of every patron for the 3 weeks leading up to the festival. That card included a promotion for a special discount for festival tickets, as well as a promo for the restaurant itself to encourage returning during the festival weekend for a unique promotion selected by the restaurant. We're really excited about our alumni engagement. It's one of the aspects of the festival that we find really valuable in bringing these alums back to town to interact both with the local community and the current students. Two of the major ways we do this are through our workshops. Photo on the right, you may recognize Robbie and Chris from the Virginia Beer Company, who are alums of the college, who came to give a workshop on how they do their branding and their marketing with their brewery. Beyond them, there are 20 plus other alums who came back and offered all kinds of sessions related to their trade in media, business, and arts. On the left is a photograph from one of our keynote panels on stage at the Kimball Theater. This was a very exciting event where we had alumni who are all from the college but now working in the TV industry for a discussion on their careers and how they got there. It was moderated by filmmaker Megan Gilbride. She's the Emmy-nominated producer of the documentary film Tower. And then the panelists as pictured there are Kim Wilcox, who's a costume designer for Stranger Things and Mr. Robot, Chitra Sampath, who's worked as a producer, writer on Good Behavior and Sleepy Hollow, Jill Twiss, who's a lead writer on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and Kristen Bowes, who's a creative marketing director for the TNT channel.
So to summarize the impact of the city's funding, the major impact was the increase in the marketing reach for the festival. It increased our budget from the previous year from $3,200 to $17,000, which was a huge jump and allowed us to do a marketing campaign on a scale we had not been able to do before. The increase in our marketing campaign helped us make more progress towards our goal of making the festival a destination event for tourists. If they don't know about it, they can't attend, so being able to put ads in publications that were statewide really made a difference, and we saw that with the attendance numbers. There was a 46% increase in attendance from 2018. And we also established some new partnerships with local businesses. The Williamsburg Hotel and Motel Association and the Williamsburg Area Restaurant Association again helped us make attendees aware of things they can take advantage of when they're in the area and offer them special promotions as they attend the festival. And as with the online ticket sales, 23% were from outside of Williamsburg, so we can see that the marketing campaign did have an impact, and there was about $10,000 in hotel bookings.
Going forward, looking to the 2020 festival, we hope to continue the positive momentum that was established over the past couple years, and the real boost of this past year, the city's money related to the marketing has just made such an incredible impact on the overall outreach efforts of the festival. Without the funding from this past year, it just wouldn't be the same. We hope to ask for the same ask later this year in $25,000 for the 2020 festival to contribute again to marketing and programming, being able to bring these note-while artists and filmmakers from around the world to Williamsburg and present this really high-end programming, both for the college and the greater community, has just been really fantastic. So thank you for the support and your time, for hearing us talk about the festival. We're happy to answer any questions you have on this presentation or the event report or anything in between.
Thank you very much. Come to my colleagues.
Thank you so much for being here today, and congratulations on the job well done. I think it's a fact that the city has a keen interest in promoting this as a destination event, and in doing so with the $25,000, it's clearly shown that it's done a lot and come a long way to growing the program. Just from last year to this year, the attendance of the increase of 787 folks, that's a pretty big number. Now, I have two questions. I'm going to throw out the one that's pretty broad. So I saw some of the publications that you guys had put out. You guys obviously did social media targeting, print towards it. I guess, what are some lessons learned? And I guess another sub-question to that is also, I saw that you have advertised to like the Style Weekly, which I believe is based in Richmond, but why not the Richmond Times-Dispatch? Why not also the Virginia Pilot Daily Press and other regional newspapers too?
Yeah.
Our lessons learned, we did include a promotional code on the ads, so if they purchased a ticket online, we would be able to see how they found out about the ads.
Cool.
And we were very surprised that those codes were not utilized many times. And some people brought in the physical newspaper and tried to redeem the code at the Kimball Theater box office, so there was some confusion about that. So next year, we will make sure that discounts promoted can be used at the box office as well.
Gotcha.
And regarding like Style Weekly versus other Richmond area publications, we did do a lot of social media targeting ad in the Richmond and kind of Fredericksburg area too. We did the regular event calendars and press releases through those publications, but the ones that we ultimately landed on that you saw listed were in great part just due to trying to make the marketing budget go as far as possible with placement ads in those publications. The Washington Post one, for example, that had a lot of exposure was one that you kind of had to pick between Post and maybe some other papers that were up near DC, but to have that kind of broader reach was really important.
Right. My last question is, you had mentioned this in your presentation. One of the aims when we had our original discussion about approving the $25,000 for this past year was increasing overnight visitation. Obviously, your partnership with the Area Restaurants Association and with the Hotel Motel Association speaks towards accomplishing those aims. So you don't have to have answers today, but have you contemplated ways to utilize, if council decided to give another $25,000, how you can grow in this potential area, encouraging more folks to visit and spend overnight from some other area to attend this festival?
The Hotel and Motel Association was very satisfied with kind of the partnership we had this year.
Great.
And efforts that we haven't mentioned here but were included is we had thousands of pamphlets go out immediately to, I believe, 80 establishments in the area, hotels, with the idea being that people would see it on a current visit and hopefully come back. And then there were programs for the actual festival delivered to those places the week of the event. In talking with Hotel and Motel in regards to the future, the kind of like, oh, if we had only got this sooner, was placement in the magazine that goes all around town for tourism in general, placement on the map, the physical map that gets distributed around Williamsburg, and one other related to the app. And the main publications that kind of serve as the year-round basis for their hotel promotion that go throughout the city. And it's already been discussed, the opportunity of including the festival in all those things for 2020, so the promotion of those start like now as opposed to 2 months before the festival.
And we also talked to them about offering a weekend package, so in addition to your hotel booking, your festival tickets would be included. So we want to explore that more with them next year and try to figure out the logistics of how to make that happen.
All right. Well, in the meantime, thank you again for presenting before council, and looking forward to considering the request again.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Well, since I'm such a proponent of the Global Film Festival, I don't want to feel like I'm biased here, but I am. And congratulations for what you all were able to accomplish. And as I said before, I've come for a number of years and participated as an ambassador to what you all were sort of leading up to it. And a couple things that I had questions on, I'm going to sort of skip around here. So I noticed that you had reached to Roanoke, but that no tickets were purchased from Roanoke. So I guess there are some lessons learned too as to how to get the word out sooner, and other ways that you might try to turn some of those clicks into tickets for next year, and sort of ways to how you would encourage sort of follow-up, or what kind of follow-ups do you plan to try to encourage additional participation outside of the region for next year? And talk to me a little bit about the timing of this. You know, we've discussed this possibility of trying to land on a weekend that you could continue with on an annual basis, and I think there's some challenges to that.
Yes, yeah, it's given that Kimball Theater is a William and Mary venue now and part of the theater department, we are restricted by the theater department's academic schedule and plan. So the only available weekend during the school year is that early weekend at the end of January, early February. So having it later on President's Day weekend, for example, just isn't feasible with their academic calendar. So to continue using Kimball Theater, we'll have to keep it at the same weekend.
Well, and I think if it can be kept the same weekend so that people start putting it on their calendar that the last weekend, first weekend in February this is when this is occurring, and it does feel a very good time for us as far as not having as many business visitors here. And you had a measurement on the hotel nights spent. Did you get any feedback from the restaurants as far as uptick in their business during the weekend? Could they put any numbers to
It did, and that was another surprising thing with, like Adam mentioned, the promotion with Chef Everett's restaurants. The promotional code that was given on the cards that were distributed was used, the most it was used was 18 times at one restaurant, so we were surprised more people didn't redeem that given the exposure the deal had. In addition to the cards, it was also mentioned on our website and in the print programs that people received. So we hope to keep increasing attendees' awareness that there are promotions to be had at other local venues while they're here for the festival.
Yeah. We don't have specific stats on the other ones who just kind of offered independently a suggested promo for their actual weekend. The main contact for that was the Williamsburg Area Restaurant Association, who were very happy and wanted to continue partnering as soon as possible for future festivals.
Well, and with having the information for the restaurant group that provided the promotion, hopefully that word will spread to other restaurants to offer the same next year. So I don't have any more questions. I will have some comments during the comment period.
So this is it. This is your one shot.
Oh, really?
No, I'm kidding. Mr. Massey.
Yeah. So any luck partnering with sports marketing?
Sports marketing? No, we did not partner with sports marketing in regards.
That might be something to think about in the future in terms of events happening that weekend.
Oh, okay. As far as like
Chamber of Commerce and
existing sporting events within Williamsburg.
Right. So maybe
January.
some people in the family might want to go to other events that not just only film events.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah. We did reach out to the chamber and spoke to them about the event and made sure they were aware, shared our website with them. But we can explore the sports marketing next year.
And then following up on two of my previous questions was any success marketing Williamsburg to location scouts?
We did talk about that with
Yes.
the Virginia Film Office, and they are excited, and apparently they've talked to some of you or others in the Williamsburg area about similar things, and they would very much be down to have a conversation about that, Williamsburg being offered as extending its availability as a place to shoot film and TV programs.
And then one of the questions I had from a previous vice mayor, not Scott, who wanted to see more of the story of a patriot, especially now since CW doesn't control the Kimball. Any progress in that?
The Story of a Patriot, but that was built for the theater in the Colonial Williamsburg's Visitors Center. The theater was built for that film. Yeah, I don't know. Can you not go watch it there twice a day, 5 times a day now?
I don't think that the local residents are going to that.
The Story of a Patriot?
To the Visitor Center.
Is the suggestion that we should show Story of a Patriot to
He
the
thought
out-of-towners?
showing it more in the area would be helpful.
Oh, I don't know. I'd be curious, council's thought on that. Yeah.
That's all I have.
I have no opinion on it.
Is that a conflict?
Yeah, I just don't want to cross that line. Can you remind me of the overall mix of funding that you get for the Global Film Festival? What percentage is this 25,000, and how does it relate to other funding sources such as tickets or anything you get from the college?
Sure. The majority comes from different departments in the college. And so the primary departments are the Charles Center, the Reeves Center, and the Muscarelli Museum. Those are I would say the largest contributors. The library gives a lot of in-kind support in addition to a cash contribution. They enable us to use the Reader Media Center for the workshops. So in terms of the breakdown.
Yeah, city was more than a third of the funding for this past year's festival. Yes. And then is the largest contributor compared to the Wayne area departments, who contribute about closer to, I would say, a fifth some of them. To break down the specific numbers, we don't have the
Oh,
full
that's,
line in front of
just
us.
ballpark is.
But yeah, but the city has by far entered as the largest sponsor of the festival with this year's contribution.
And looking at the marketing reach slide,
Mhm.
it's number 5. Can you explain what that means relative to if you're in the post, but you're not reaching?
This is more for like those geo-specific ads we're talking about. The actual marketing went through the whole state. So like the Post went DC, Maryland, Virginia, the Instagram and Facebook ads and the online ads went throughout the entire state, some of which were just to general patrons of the arts, some of which were to folks looking for weekend getaways, some of which were to people who are already engaging with film festivals elsewhere, and just delivering those directly to them. So that's not represented here. This is for
Just the
geo-targeting.
cities, yeah.
Because I was just wondering about Charlottesville, Fredericksburg, and
Yeah.
not even getting up to Northern Virginia, but, places where there are a fair amount of people who might have interest in this.
Yeah, there are specialized promotional campaigns in each of those cities.
Tell us what you see about the opportunity to leverage the investment that you made this year in marketing, in creating awareness, and how you can build upon that in future years, thinking that, this is my opinion, that you tell me if I'm wrong or tell me what you think, that you have to start laying the groundwork on the marketing at some point to make people, to start building that awareness of the festival, so once you hit people enough times, they eventually make that decision to come. I mean, do you see money that was invested this year paying off next year as well, or the year after that? How does that work?
Yeah, I think there's a certain benefit to having, especially the greater Hampton roads, greater Williamsburg area up to Richmond, seeing those, the recognition of the brand and the print continue over and over. I think the elements that are more modifiable that we'll want to tweak are the things like the Roanoke conversation we were having with Councilmember Ramsey there about, do we geo-target certain parts of the state, or do we continue to try to find people who are interested in Williamsburg as a destination and people who are interested in film festivals as an activity? It's also a very weird time of year. It's the dead of winter. It's, at the end of the movie year, if you will, right before Oscar season. So it's a very specific ask.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
to continue building, I think, as was pointed out, having it on the same weekend each year will help people mark their calendar. We can start promoting that at the end of the festival, so telling people, remember to save the date for next year. We are building the email listserv for the festival as well, so we're able to connect with people more regularly. And so we want to keep the marketing campaign going at the same scale so we can reach the same population, and it will start to become familiar to them. They'll remember, oh yes, it's November, December, I start seeing ads for the Global Film Festival. Let me make sure to check their website and make my plans for Williamsburg. So that's what we're hoping will happen, and we think we'll continue to build as we keep the programming going at the same time of year.
And looking at the email listserv that Liz mentioned, in looking at other festivals and what their most important elements are for getting people to return or come back, the email listserv has come up time and time again. And with the influx of new people, including from out of town, the festival's main listserv over than doubled in its amount of subscribers, which is really great. And we're able to see the metrics on people opening those emails and clicking through on things, and that's been really great numbers. And we had over 14,000 people visit the festival website the week of the festival. Which is also a really nice number to see. So we're going to try to keep those regular channels going in order to have that familiarity with the event.
And this may be as much a question for city staff as it is for you, and it's more rhetorical than I'm really looking for an answer, but it makes me wonder when I think about the list of outside agencies that we fund, and we've got the Global Film Festival, and we've got Williamsburg Live, and we've got Culture Fix, and we've got An Occasion for the Arts. What are these different events put on by different groups doing to cross-promote each other to help, their own target audience become aware of the other offerings that are going on in town? Because I can imagine some of the same people would be interested who come to the Occasion for the Arts might want to come to this and vice versa. And I think that it would apply to all of the groups that we do. So it might just be a conversation we look to have in the future.
It's an excellent question. One of the things that we've talked a little bit about is 2 points. Number one is if you're a group like AVAdventure promoting the William & Mary Global Film Festival, how do you transition from an annual applicant to a grant fund like the Tourism Contingency Fund to the outside agency list? And then the second question is, once you're on the outside agency list, the process for that is that at a certain point in the budget calendar, we send out notices to everybody that has formerly received funding to let them know that they need to submit their request for the year. We've talked a little bit about how to revise that process. That could include a meeting of those people in each kind of category. If you think about how we've got those outside agencies grouped by how they receive funding, and at that meeting, it might be a good opportunity for us to have sort of a more global discussion of issues related to their category of funding.
Yeah, and it might be more complicated than I naively think it is from the outside, but I would also believe it would be beneficial to each and every group to participate in that.
It's a good idea.
I'm sorry, you had comments, Ms. Ramsey.
Well, I did have a couple comments spurred by some of your comments, and one was that I think Williamsburg is becoming more well-known as a vibrant music scene, and there's a very successful jazz fest in mid-January that the city helps support, which would be an excellent opportunity to try to sort of work together. And for me, this just helps broaden the brand of Williamsburg. It brings in a different, some the same, some different groups of people, but those interested in arts and learning about different cultures. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the quality of the films that you all were able to bring to Williamsburg. There was at least one Academy Award nomination. There was the Colombian film that after the festival, I saw a big article in the New York Times about it. And so I think that that is also worthy of note. And not only our exposure to those types of films, but I think the alumni who come back get exposure to a different Williamsburg than when they were here. I talked to Megan, is it Gilbright? Yeah. And I came when she showed the tower, and she was so willing to come back this time and participate, and she was just thrilled at all the different opportunities to engage with people, as well as different restaurants that are here now than when she was, I don't know when she was here, early 2000s, something like that. So I think it helps in a multiple of ways to get people to recognize that Williamsburg's not the same sleepy town or same sort of one interest focus. So thank you.
Ms. Sykes, Mr. Stackhouse, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This takes us to our third background presentation, which is the presentation of the city manager's proposed fiscal year 20 budget. Mr. Trivette. Mr. Trivette, there must be a typo on my presentation because mine shows 65 slides. Is that accurate? Oh, my goodness.
It's 65 slides because this time try something different. A program called Prezi. And the reason we're doing that is because I think it might lend itself better to the material that we're going to try to cover today and the way that we wanted to cover it. And as I go through the presentation, hopefully the reason for that will become clear. So with that, we're going to move through the presentation of the proposed FY20 budget. This is the next step in our continuing progress along our budget calendar process as we move forward toward adoption of the budget, hopefully in May. So I want to start with the intro. As you all know, I delivered the proposed budget in its form a couple of weeks ago. And probably the most notable piece of it is the fold-out in the middle that is the budget message. And it has a very distinct kind of look to it. There's a picture of the first page of it there. And the format is 11 by 17. And this first section is really talking about the theme, and it's the city manager's statement. And what it does is it sort of sets the tone for what's going to be covered in the budget message. And so some of the key pieces of the theme is that What we're talking about here is renewal and sort of renewing the city of Williamsburg's commitment to a couple of key concepts. Structural balance and innovation being key among those. Also talking about how Williamsburg has been and will continue to be a fiscal model for others to follow. And also, and maybe most importantly, that this budget should be a relevant method of communication both internally and externally. It's not just a document that goes on the shelf that we pull off to look at a number. It's supposed to communicate the vision and the mission for the city and all of its departments using the budget as that tool. So as we move through the process, this idea of an 11 by 17 format is one that we're trying to progress toward for the whole budget, not just the budget message. And if we're successful, and we hope that we will be, when we get to adoption in May, it's likely that the budget will look largely like it does right now, with the budget message being 11 by 17 and the rest of the book being 8.5 by 11. But by the time we get to July, where we have printed final versions, we hope to have a complete book that's 11 by 17. Now, what that does for us is a couple of things. Number one, it allows us to better organize the book so that passages that are relevant to each other can be joined together on the same page because we have more real estate to work with. The other thing that it does, it allows us to do things like we have done in the budget message, which is combine impressive graphics to make it more enjoyable, as well as do better design work to make it more interesting and engaging for the reader. So hopefully that'll be a success and something that will completely transform the budget book. The other thing that it will do is give us the opportunity to reduce the budget by half in the number of pages. The book this year was well on its way to being over 400 pages. Not exactly a page turner. No offense, Ms. Dameron, despite best efforts. But, you know, if it's reduced by half, hopefully we can get something that is enjoyable and engaging. So what's the story of the budget? This is it in a nutshell. There are 6 funds. We've talked about those already at length at the budget retreat. Most of what we're going to cover today is going to be centered around what has changed since the retreat. And the big thing that you should notice is that the number overall has changed from $70 million, over $70 million proposed at the retreat, to $68 million. So at the highest level, the 2 things that changed that most impacted this number were the fact that we're still complicated in the budget in terms of how we are showing the new tourism development fund and the transfer of money from the general fund to the development fund and the incoming new tax revenue. And so we adjusted that, which resulted in a decrease of that total budget number. And then also we did manage to reduce some spending in particularly the sales tax capital improvement fund, which we're going to talk about as it relates to the educational capital improvements for the school system. And so that overall adjusted the budget down to $68,283,717. So let's talk about the major drivers of the budget. And this is our discussion today is largely going to follow the budget message. So if you're following along at home and you're looking at it online, you can pull up the budget message and see this in detail. There were 4 major drivers for the budget this year. They are collaboration, education, the assessed value, and the reserve. If you saw or participated in the retreat, these should not be new ideas for you. Collaboration is one that was very important to Ms. Dameron and I as we went through the budget process. Early on, we said that it was important that everybody that had a stake in the budget have the opportunity to collaborate in its development. And so as we began to put the budget together, we designed it so that we had meetings with everyone to determine need. And we said to all the department heads that contributed to the budget, come to us with what you require, not what you think we can fund, and allow us to have a conversation jointly to negotiate from that point. And no, we were not able to meet all those needs, and we're going to talk about that when we get there. But in the end, what it did do is it allowed Ms. Dameron and I to have a much better understanding of what the true needs were across the whole organization. In the end, we will have had over 53 meetings just to deal with the bottom line numbers of the budget. One type of collaboration that I wanted to highlight that was a significant change for us this year was the degree that we went to work collaboratively with James City County as it related to the development of the school system budget and the Williamsburg James City County school system. As I said earlier, we made some fairly significant changes to the city CIP as a result of moving things around on the school system CIP, and that would not have been possible had it not been to the degree of cooperation that we enjoyed with our partners at James City County and the school district. And we'll talk about that when we get there. Next is education. Obviously, a big driver in our overall budget this year were increases in education costs. This year, there was an increase in personnel costs in the school system. It was widely publicized that the governor proposed an increase to education salaries of 5%. The net effect of that, of course, you know, is that at the local level, the governor's increase to state-funded positions are only those that are funded through the standards of quality, which leaves localities to pay for the majority of the rest. And so the net effect of that in the Williamsburg James City County school system is about 4% school system-wide. The budget that you have today includes the proposed budget by the school superintendent, and so that's what's reflected here. So that's a 3.2% increase over last year's fiscal year need. And one of the things that people ask me most often as it relates to our cost of education is, what are we paying per student? And so we put that number in there as sort of an infographic, and our cost this year per student is $10.4 thousand. And while that's a grabbing number because it's large, what I would say is, just for a minute, consider what that number would be if we were operating our own school system, not part of a joint school system. So we would have our own teachers, our own superintendent, our own busing system, our own food needs in the cafeterias, and quickly that number climbs to maybe even quadruple that. So for the quality of education that we're able to offer, I think that we're getting a bargain. Probably the biggest news story of this year's budget is the assessed value increase. You know, it's very important that everyone understand that this budget does not include a tax increase, but it does include an increase in assessed value. This is not a number that's set by the city manager or by the city council. This is derived by the city's annual assessment process as we go out and review the sales of real estate in the community to the assessed value that we had set on that property last year. And we adjust it up or down to keep it within an acceptable ratio of that assessed value to sales value. This year, based on what we're seeing, we are expecting that number not to exceed, on average, in the city, to get to 6%. And that's what we advertised. So the state requires us to advertise what we anticipate to be the maximum. And as I said, that would be 6%. The budget that we have presented today is 4%. So there's a degree of room there between 4% and 6%. The reality as we move through the assessment process, which won't be complete until December, is that we think it's going to end up being around 5.7%. So what will happen is, when we get to December, we, the city council and the staff, will have to decide what to do with the excess revenue that might be generated by that difference. And we're going to talk about that as we move through the process. So again, in the budget message, I included a little infographic on how does this impact me as a resident? And the number one question we get is, how much is this going to increase my tax bill? So we went through a little exercise on average property value in the city and how does this increase affect you? Well, if the average property value is around $300,000, your tax bill would increase $56 per bill, remembering, of course, that we bill twice a year. Next is the reserve, and this is something, of course, you hear me talk about it all the time, and it's because we are concerned at the level of spending that we do that attacks the reserve and the amount that we're drawing down on it. And so we point out to you that in recent past, we have lowered the reserve by 14%, which is a fairly dramatic drop. Now, again, it's important to note that the city of Williamsburg maintains a very healthy reserve policy, and we are not below the city council's policy. But if we continue on our current trend, we will be. And so we need to turn that trend around and plan for continuing to add to that reserve in the future. And so we point out that this budget is very fiscally conservative for that purpose. So as I've noted here in this message, Ms. Dameron and I, while the city's policy is 35% of the city's operating budget to be held in reserve, we would prefer that number to be around 40%. And what that does is it gives us elasticity above the policy to address any issues that might come up in any given fiscal year. We call that resiliency. So those are the major drivers. And now I wanted to talk about the funds specifically. So on this page of the budget message, we talk about the funds that make up the city's overall largest budget pieces. The first one we're going to talk about is the tourism fund. And so here I've included a sheet right out of the city budget. I believe it's page D33 for those that are interested. And I included this page because I wanted to show you how this new fund of the city budget has been divided up. And I wanted to highlight that a couple of changes that we have made here, particularly since the retreat, were designed to address concerns that we heard from City Council and the community. One of the things that we talked about was the fact that there was concern over the overall administrative expense that was built into administering the fund. And so what you should note is that that number has gone down significantly. The way that we did that is, if you remember the policy for this fund, is it sets aside up to 10% of the overall fund expense to be available for administrative costs. When we went back and looked at it, what we found was that there was a great deal of money being used to calculate that 10% that really was not in the control of the staff doing the administration. And so when we pulled that out, we were left with a much smaller number. And so we think that this is a much more representative component of what it's going to take to administer the fund. The other thing that I would note is this is really our first year of running the tourism fund and staffing it. And so at the end of this fiscal year, the one that we're about to approve the budget for, we will have a much better idea of what's required for the tourism fund and can adjust that number down and possibly even eliminate that contingency line entirely that makes up the 10% balance.
Can I just add here that that 10% was a number that we agreed would not, that was a cap. We could not spend more than 10% on it, but we had no intention of spending the entire 10%. That was just giving us the cushion because we didn't know what it was going to cost to administer it.
That's right.
I think that's an important distinction, that we're not looking to spend this money just because it's there.
That's right. And if you look in the budget, what you'll see is we have budgeted for the typical line items of a department, right? It's very likely that as we go through the fiscal year, many of those lines will not get spent in their entirety, and they will remain in the fund. And that money would roll over to the other components of the fund to be available for spending in future fiscal years. And then in the next fiscal year, we will adjust those lines down, and that contingency line that's just there to help us balance that need, if we should find something that has a shortfall, would be distributed in the next fiscal year and possibly even eliminated. So, you know, it may be that we find in fiscal year 21, we want to take that $121,000 that's held in contingency for administrative purposes and redistribute it to either the tourism grant program or to tourism contingency. So when we talk about the tourism fund, there's a couple of things that are important to discuss. Number one is how are decisions made relative to the funding that's available here. And so it's critically important that the public and the city council understand that if you hold aside the administrative funding and the funding that we cannot control because it's statutorily mandated, you are left with essentially three categories of funding. And they're highlighted here. The first one is the Tourism Contingency Fund. Now, this is a historic fund that the council has operated to deal with, as Michelle likes to say, just-in-time funding for applications to do special events, marketing of existing events that wasn't anticipated, opportunities to grow kind of quality of life events within the community. Historically, that's been funded. There's a policy that exists on how to evaluate those applications as they come in. There are 2 points of control. The staff evaluates the applications and makes a recommendation to City Council. City Council makes the ultimate decision. It's based on a first come, first serve. So the money that's made available on July the 1st is available until it's awarded. The next available source of funds is the grant fund, and that's the new source, and that's $1.9 million according to the proposed budget. It has 3 points of control: the staff recommendation, the Tourism Development Grant Review Committee, and then finally the City Council that approves the awards. And then the third is the outside agency group. And so what we tried to do with the Tourism Fund this year was take it and make it sort of mirror the other funds within the city's purview so that it had some semblance that made it seem like the rest. And so we took those agencies that have historically received funding for tourism activities and grouped them all here. And so you'll be able to see those in the list in a few minutes. That source of funds is $1.5 million. It has 2 points of control, just like the other outside agencies. It's a staff review, and then ultimately the City Council approves it as part of the budget process.
So help me understand how the maintenance of effort fits into this, which is a statute. It's mandated by statute. But the amount that we actually give for the operation of the business council is only a fraction of that total. And the rest we still have to spend, but we have discretion as to how that is spent.
Yes, so let's go back to the budget list. And the reason I go back is because we're really trying to do our best to make this sheet as transparent as we can. And so if you look about midway down, there are 2 line items there under tourism, marketing, and maintenance of effort. The first one is maintenance of effort, and that's the amount of money that you're talking about, $800,000. So that's the amount that under Senate Bill 942, now part of Virginia Code, is mandated to go to the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance. And what happens is that money gets transferred to them quarterly, and every year they will, according to their new bylaws, determine a budget as part of the business council for their operation. From that $800,000, they will extract what they need to operate and transfer the remainder to the Tourism Council. And the Tourism Council will take that remaining amount and put it, if they follow what they did this year, into a fund that closely mirrors what we're doing at our local level for a tourism development grant process. Our discretion is only in what we submit as an application for that fund.
Well, our discretion is that that only works as long as everybody continues to agree that that's the way it's going to work. The second somebody decides, I don't want it to work that way, which could be us or it could be another jurisdiction, then there's got to be another plan for how that money is handled, where it goes, and how it's spent. So which of the 3 pots or lines on your other slide would that go into, or would there be a 4th line?
So you're saying if the Tourism Council decided not to do it that way?
Correct.
I think that would be a council decision, because you could, at that point, you would be able to place it where you would want it to go.
So, but that's the question. Will we need a 4th line here, or would we put it in one of the 3 existing lines?
I think you could do either of those. You could put it in its own line or put it in one of the existing lines. The intent was that it go for tourism development or marketing. And so as long as it's being spent on one of those things, I think it satisfies the intent.
Okay.
So those are the 3 broad categories of funding available through the Tourism Fund and their methods of control. Next is the Sales Tax Fund, which is most commonly known as capital improvements. And what I'm showing you here is how this has evolved since the retreat. I showed you at the retreat the first chart, which is showing you at the bottom, and it's very hard to see, and I apologize for that, the percentages of what was available or forecasted to be available in the reserve if we funded all of the projects that we had planned. And what should be most notable is the fact that we dropped below the city's reserve policy pretty quickly. And that was a concern. It was largely due to the building in of the school system's capital improvement plan, which included a whole host of projects designed to alleviate capacity issues at the elementary and high school level. So then the next chart that's shown here is how I proposed adjusting the school system's proposed CIP to take advantage of what I considered window of opportunity based on their enrollment projections for both elementary and high school. And so if you look, you can see that in that first fiscal year, FY20, there was a $3.5 million expense proposed for a design for a new elementary school. And obviously, moving that $3.5 million expense out was a big savings for us because we have about a 10% share of that cost if it were to be funded in FY20. And so very minor things like that had a very significant impact on these overall percentages. As we went through the budget process of development and planning, working collaboratively with James City County and the school district, we were able to reach agreement on how these things were moved out over this period of time, and it resulted in a new CIP, which has been included in your proposed budget. And what is most noticeable here is at the bottom, the percentages are much more favorable. So much so that what's shown here is that we can actually fund the projects that are envisioned to deal with capacity at the school system without a tax increase and without dipping below the policy that has been set by the City Council for the reserve, all the way out through the plan horizon of fiscal year 24. That's not to say that we won't have to do some adjustments or better fiscal planning as we move through the plan, because these are only the projects that we know exist right now, and inevitably there will be things come up as we go through the future fiscal years that have to be added, and those percentages will drop. But I think that we're much better prepared to deal with them now than we would have been had we just accepted the proposed CIP.
The other thing that I think is worth noting is that we generally do not spend all of the money that's allocated in the 5-year CIP because it's a plan, it's not a budget.
Right.
And so it's constantly adjusted from year to year as we stretch out for the next 5 years, and
right.
projects move or they don't get completely funded. So I don't want people to think there was ever a consideration that we were going to adopt a CIP that would have taken our funding reserve down below our 30%. We would have had to have not done something, or we would have had to have changed our timing if we could not have gotten the school in James City County to work with us.
That's right. You know, I think it's something that I have said numerous times about the GIOs, but it bears saying here is, you know, we have 204 approved full-time equivalent positions in the city. We have about 198 of those actually staffed. And if you look at this CIP, what you see is we have a planned expense in the coming fiscal year of over $16 million, and that's just impossible for a city our size, to your point, Mayor. So a lot of what happens is, and you can see it here actually shown, there's a column that says carryover from FY 2019, and there's a column that says estimated through 2019. Those two columns are really there so that Ms. Dameron and I can keep track of where that money goes that doesn't get spent. And it's actually quite difficult for us, to be honest with you. So we're looking at how we're going to change the accounting process for the capital improvement plan to make it much easier for us to keep track of that funding, because you're right, a lot of it goes unspent.
Point out, you know, in the red dollars that you had in the previous slide there, that you pointed out during the school board meeting that those are placeholders. We know that those costs will go up.
That's right.
But you're just moving the placeholders.
Yes, exactly. That's a good point, Mr. Maslin. One of the disadvantages to moving a project from a current fiscal year out to even the next fiscal year is the escalation of cost, both in design and construction. And in the construction industry, which I am not a part of, there's an escalation factor that's fairly common. I'm not going to recite it because I don't know what it is, but you could apply that and add that to these costs. We know that exists, but on the whole, the savings generated by moving it out to us is worth it. So we're glad to see this change happen. But we are aware the cost will increase. I guess it does bear mentioning, too, if you look at this, one of the things that we pointed out to the school system, the school board, the city council, and James City County staff is that, you know, budgeting in FY20 for the design of a new elementary school was very ambitious because, you know, FY20 begins July the 1st, and we've not selected a site for this new elementary school, and so thinking that we would get to the point of having selected a site, negotiated for its acquisition, and been through a procurement process to begin design was fairly ambitious. And so moving it out a few years, I really don't think is that much of a change from what the school system probably intended. So next is the utility fund. This is something that we don't spend a lot of time talking about, but as we move through the next few fiscal years, we're probably going to spend a little bit more time on. And it really boils down to, and again, I deliberately decided to show you some slides right out of the budget. These are pages that you can find in the appendix. I've highlighted here in a red box the end of the year construction capital balances that are forecasted. And the first sheet shows you what those balances would be if we did not adjust the utility rate at all. So if we don't address the price per 1,000-gallon rate for inside the city at all, this would be the resulting balance at the end of those fiscal years. And the reason I've highlighted them is because I want to show you that it's fairly consistent. $6 million in 2018, 6.6, 6.6, 6.7, 6.5, and then it drops significantly to 5.7. It drops again to 5.5, and that trend continues if we forecasted it out beyond 2024. And so that's an alarming trend. As we said during the retreat, it's pointed out clearly in the budget message. This is largely due to a decrease in consumption. We attribute that to a lot of different things. Number one is that the society as a whole has become a lot more environmentally minded and has dropped consumption, but also because our fixtures have become low flow and they have reduced in cost. It's much more economical to put them in and equates to savings in your overall utility bills. And so we need to adjust to accommodate for that. The next thing I've done is I've drawn a box around the next page in the appendix, which shows you sort of a potential outcome. And this box shows you a rate increase schedule. There is a typo in it. If you look, in July 1st, 2023, it shows a 2% increase in the rate, but then it also shows the proposed rate dropping back to 5.3. That is just a typo. The math is correct. I've highlighted at the bottom in a green box the impact that has on those construction capital numbers. And so if you look, you can see that this forecasts a much better outcome that's a bit more consistent in terms of a predictable number for construction capital. So again, there's still a drop. We go from 6.6 to 5.9 and then 5.9. So that's a much more stable trend as we move out into the horizon for that planning period. And that's something that we're much more comfortable with. Now, the obvious question that you could ask here is, why wouldn't we make this adjustment sooner? Should we not be concerned about the drop from 7 million to 6 million and then from 6 million to 5 million? And what I would offer to you is we could be concerned about that. But if you think about our operating reserve for the general fund, we have a policy that says 35%. And I tell you all the time, so does Ms. Dameron, that's a very healthy percentage. If we look back at the rating agencies' reports, it tells us that's a very healthy percentage, above the median across the country for local governments our size. If you look here, you can see the actual income and expense of this utility fund at the top, and it's around $4 million. So we actually have more than 100% of the operating revenue for any given year held in reserve. So we're well above what would be considered a safe safety net. The difficulty is we've been running this utility since, I think, 1927, 1924. I've forgotten now. It's in the budget message. That's a long time. And so we have some aging infrastructure. And you never know exactly when it might fail. And so we need to be prepared for some cost that could be large. And so we need to maintain a healthy balance there. We think this does that. So the point of all this is that we want to start saying now to the community and to the city council, be prepared for a utility rate increase as we get on into the fiscal horizon of our capital planning. So think 21, 22 for that first increase of 2%.
Well, and as I mentioned before to Mr. Clayton, we also don't know what's going to be the impact and we might have some idea, but we don't know what the overall total impact is going to be in Midtown Row, and if there's any increase in activity out in the Riverside area. There's some potential for a fair increase in usage to occur, which might help defray some of the overhead costs because they're spread over more gallons instead of fewer, which might put this out another year or two after that, or not.
Right. Well, another reason that we're not talking about an increase in the rate this year is because of connection fees associated with the Midtown Row project. Had it not been for some of those large connection fees, we would probably be talking about an increase in the rate sooner than 21 or 22. So I put this in here. We showed you this, of course, at the retreat, and the only reason I put it in was just to remind you that we do have the lowest rate in the region for our utility. So there is a lot of room for expanding the rate. Even if we added to the rate minorly, we would still have the lowest rate in the region. So we're in a great position in terms of operating our utility. Debt capacity is the next thing that I wanted to talk about on this page of the budget message. And the only reason I put this in here is because it's a topic that we should be talking about when we review the budget. I think it gets left out very often when we talk about the budget in the city of Williamsburg because we have such a low debt now, and we have for a long time operated under a pay-as-you-go policy for new projects. And that's an excellent method of operation. It goes right back to our being the fiscal model. But we should also remember that debt can be a tool. And as we consider the fact that our reserve is decreasing and we have projects that we know we want to pursue, we may consider adding to the debt in a minor amount so that we can pursue those sooner rather than later. So if you look at this, we've seen this chart before. This is the chart produced by Davenport when we were considering our most recent bond issue. It shows you, the thing that I like about it is it shows you in the dark green versus the light green, the old debt versus the new debt, which gives you some idea of how the old debt would have been extinguished before you added the new debt on. And then over on the right, you can see I've got there in the debt message the forecast of how the debt operates. Some of the key pieces of that, and the only reason I bring them up is so that you can see how healthy our debt portfolio is. The state has a cap on debt for local governments, and it's 10% of your overall land book value. So what that means to the average person is if you think about our overall city's real estate value, we can leverage up to 10% of that. So if you were going to the bank to get a loan to buy a home, and they say, well, what's your collateral? Our collateral would be the real estate value of the overall city, and we can borrow up to 10%. In our case, that would equate to a loan of $186 million. Not that we would ever borrow that much money, but we could if we wanted to.
You're just trying to give people indigestion.
Our current debt totals $21 million, so we're well within the range of what's allowed, and our debt service for the coming fiscal year is $2.3 million. So certainly a very manageable debt portfolio there. So that's the special fund coverage. Next, I wanted to talk about what's included in this budget. And so we talked about the major drivers, we've talked about the funds and how they're divided up. Now let's talk about what's really driving that $68 million number. So first is the personnel cost, and that's not surprising. I think in most budgets what you find is the biggest cost is personnel. And this year the driver is the fact that we did a healthy personnel increase. Pretty consistent with the region though overall. But we did do something a little unique this year. What we did was we did a cost of living increase of 2%, which everybody was entitled to. And then we added to that the availability of a 3% merit increase. And that whether or not you got 1%, 0%, or 3% was based on your evaluation. And so the department heads did evaluations during the year, and then when we did our our proposed personnel increases, they sat down, looked at those evaluations, and determined what you should receive as a reward for your performance during the year. If you consider that with the cost of living increase, over the 208 employees that received evaluations, what you find is that the average increase across the organization was about 3%. Which is very much in line with the overall increases of our regional governments across the region. So if you looked at like York, I think was less than 3%. I think Hampton was doing 5% for their employees, so well in line with the other local governments. Next, I wanted to talk about another major driver was the overall increases in departmental spending. And that number this year is about $20.5 million, which seems like a lot, and it is. The increase, though, is only $516,000 over last year, which is a 2.6% increase, which is right in line with the cost of living increase that the feds awarded in 2018, which was 2.8%. The major reason for that $516,000 increase was really not new spending in those departments. One of the things that we talked a lot about in former fiscal year budgets was the fact that we were doing a pay and class study and the implementation of that study. And so you may remember that last year when we implemented the pay and class study, we took the $600,000 cost of that and rolled it into the existing budgets. And so what we did was we artificially reduced those operating budgets to accommodate that increase. What that really did was it forced those departments to finish the year with a large number of line items that were in the red. And so we adjusted those numbers back to what they needed to be so that they didn't have that problem at the end of the fiscal year. And so while that seems like a large number, the increase really is just accommodating existing spending. So here are some other major increases that we had in this budget. The first is solid waste. We've talked about that, obviously. That represents the increase in the recycling contract. That our share of it was $175,000. Next is the human services increase. We talked about the fact that, again, the trend in human services was increased service delivery, which equates to increased cost, which we have very little control over. So we have been adding to their departmental budget so that we can increase the reserve that's available to compensate for that. And this year we're adding $112,000 in city share to that. Information technology, as the industry changes from what we considered to be sort of single point of sale software contracts to long-term management contracts where you receive upgrades every year as part of an annual service fee. The increased cost there and adding new software, of course, is $53,000. Adding a new city assessor, upgrading processes there, bringing in new software to increase our capabilities, $39,000. And then the library, $32,000 increase associated with upgrading IT and implementing the pay and class study that James City County has completed as well. Other notable pieces of the budget is how many new staff persons we're adding. This budget proposes adding a new FTE position, but it's important to point out that this is not adding to the budget. What we have done is taken money from our VDOT allowance to fund that position, and it will be a position in the streets division related to taking on street maintenance in the historic district. So just as important as what's included is what's not included. And so this is a list of that. In this budget, we had a number of meetings, as I pointed out at the beginning, of meetings to determine what the needs were. And those needs totaled over $2.2 million. Obviously, we could not accommodate them all in the operating budget without a significant increase in revenue. And so we were able to meet $783,000 of that. And so we felt pretty accomplished in meeting those needs, and I think that most of the people that were part of the process felt very rewarded at the end of that. That leaves us with about 1.4 that is unfilled, and some of those are highlighted over on the right. I'm just going to walk you through a couple of those. The fire department and the police department have both indicated a need for additional personnel, 4 positions in each department, each equaling $300,000. We have talked about that, of course, already. I talked about in the beginning that this budget is a very conservative budget, accounting for only 4% of an anticipated 5.7% in the increase of assessed value, and that when we reach December, we will need to distribute the funding that results from that difference. And we would hope to have enough money to meet some of the need of these two departments at that time. If our forecasts are correct, hopefully we'll have enough to get there. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. On the city manager's office side, there were two requests that were not met. A position to help us do more of what you're looking at today, video and graphic design. As we have more meetings that people would like to see televised, we have a need to have a staff person who can do video on a full-time basis. And as we do more and more graphic communication, we need someone that has an expertise in graphic design. And then also, we wanted to go back to the model that we had in the city manager's office a year ago, where we had an administrative person on a part-time basis helping out in the office for coverage of the front desk and allowing us to have a full-time, part-time city clerk. In the police department, we look at the comparison of our benefits package, and one of the things that we are deficient in is a take-home vehicle policy. And so we wanted to try and find a way to overcome that. We unfortunately could not budget for it this year, so in future years we'll be considering that. The public service agencies, there was a list of requests that we could not meet. That totaled $54,000. And then the Commissioner of Revenue had a list of needs on the personnel side that totaled $40,000. That's not included in this budget either. So diving into that a little bit further, let's talk about the outside agency requests that were not met. The outside agencies this year, as I talked about in the last presentation, there's a process by which we send out letters during the budget process advertising that it's time for the outside agencies to submit their requests. They send it in letter format. Those requests are included in your budget as part of the appendix. This year, those that submitted and are included in the general fund request process totaled $1.2 million in requests, equaling 2% of the total budget. I want to start with the human service agencies. So the human services agencies go through their own process of being reviewed by its own board at the human services level, and they make a recommendation to City Council. We had a presentation on that earlier, and in that process, there's a list of needs that go unmet, and that's shown here. It equates to $54,000 of need that were not met. The big numbers that need to be highlighted are the ones for Colonial Behavioral Health, $18,000, and Old Town Medical and Dental Center of $20,000. The last time that we met, we were talking about this, and I believe City Council asked me to think about how we might meet some of this need, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Since we had that meeting, we did receive some new information. Colonial Behavioral Health sent this new budget proposal to James City County that shows that they have decreased their request to only $4,000 from the city of Williamsburg, which is about 20% of their original request. On the tourism fund side, this is a list of the outside agencies that we currently fund. On the chart, you can see there's an amount funded and then the amount unfunded. So you can see there were very few agencies that requested more than we have funded in the past, but there is a list there. I did want to go ahead and show you an example of a way that you could meet some of the need. And so I've shown that if you think about that budget document that we talked about earlier, there's $150,000 in the proposed budget earmarked for tourism contingency. If you wanted to meet the need that Williamsburg Live has requested that was unmet. So last year they were funded in the amount of $80,000. In this budget, they are funded again in the amount of $80,000. They have requested a new amount of $20,000 additional. That would go toward expanding that festival. As we have heard from them in former presentations, that would go toward booking even better, bigger names to their event, which would bring more people to stay overnight here in the city. If you wanted to meet that need, you could subtract that from the Tourism Contingency Fund, awarding them the $20,000, which would reduce the budgeted line item to $130,000 for tourism contingency. So this is an example of a change that the City Council could make to the proposed budget that we would make between now and adoption of the budget. Other changes that we would ask you to consider since the retreat, we received a request from the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. They did not send a request, or we didn't receive their request during the normal outside agency period. It's $5,500. Historically, we have funded them. They depend upon the funding, and we would ask that you consider adding that to the budget. Also, we have received a request from the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, $11,000 to assist them in meeting the need for reviewing body camera footage. Obviously, that's a need that has increased greatly in recent years. And in addition to that, James City County has increased their contribution to the courthouse operating needs, and we need to match that as well at $2,400. So the overall need there is $18,900. I'm going to come back to that need and show you how we propose meeting it so that you're not left with wondering how we're going to match it. Other items that are included in this budget that represent a change since the retreat. In the general fund, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through this line by line, but this is a list of some of the things that have changed so that you can sort of keep track. At the top, we've got some revenues that increased, recordation tax, sales tax, and then down at the bottom are some expenditures that changed. And I wanted to point out just one because it's a little confusing, and it's particularly confusing because of the number of times that it does change. And that is the the reduction in school operations. So the way that the school budget works in relationship to our budget is fairly complex. We produce a budget first. Our budget is based on our best estimate for what the school system will need. It's largely based on what their budget was last year and what we know has been advertised by the governor's budget, right? So this year, the governor had advertised a 5% increase. So our original budget that was shown to you at the retreat counted on about a 5% increase in operational costs for the school system. Between the retreat and now, between the retreat and the production of our budget document, the superintendent produced her proposed budget, which had a number reduced from what we had estimated at the retreat. And that's the reduction that's shown here of $47,970. So what's shown on this chart reflects the changes since the retreat that are included in the proposed budget document. There's a whole nother set of numbers that I'm going to show you in a minute that are changes since the proposed document was printed that reflect the James City County budget that has since been released that we now have to match. So if you think about the school system budget and how it impacts us, it actually changes 4 times. The governor's proposed budget, the school superintendent's proposed budget, the James City County's proposed budget, and then ultimately our adopted budget.
And can I just add to that, in years past, it has not been out of the ordinary for the state's numbers to change, although not in a great way, but in some small amount that then further impacts the budget before we end up adopting it, and sometimes it comes after the adoption.
Absolutely.
Moving target?
Moving target. The other thing that's of note here is at the bottom of this chart is a note that says, for all funds, eliminate $2.2 million. And that's just showing you the required accounting maneuver of how we are showing the transfer of funds related to the tourism fund and the payment from the general fund to the tourism fund of that $2.2 million. So next is utility fund, and again, this just shows you the changes since the retreat. It's a whole host of very minor adjustments to that operating budget after sitting down and really looking at expenses and trends from last year. Next is the sales tax fund. As I said, the big change here is changing the timing of the school construction and then adding a vehicle to our vehicle replacement plan. And then the last one is the Public Assistance Fund. And this is, this is another one of those funds that people largely ignore. And this is sort of a safety net for the Human Services Division. As you know, that's a fund that is largely, not largely, but partially reimbursed by the state for their operation. But we never really know in any fiscal year how much service they're going to provide, which in turn means we don't know exactly how much we're going to have to pay for. And so every year we have to rely on the Public Assistance Fund, which is essentially their reserve, more and more. And so we're trying to build this fund up and not detract from it as much as we have been. And so you can see here some increases in state funding since the retreat, which were good news, as well as our proposed increase in the city contribution of 112, which we talked about on another slide. Now let's talk about happier news, which are expected revenue changes. So, as I said, what we were just talking about are changes that are reflected in the proposed budget document. Now we're going to talk about changes that are not reflected in the proposed budget document. And the first are revenue changes that we will see prior to July the 1st that will be reflected in the adopted budget. So these two changes here represent a total revenue increase of $123,907. The first one is a reduction in the city's contribution to the regional jail of $41,280. And the next one is the reduction that I talked about as a result of the James City County proposed budget that has not been adopted yet of the school system's operating budget. Right? So what we do is we match their contribution, which resulted in a savings from our proposed budget of $82,000. So that gives us $123,907 in unanticipated revenue to reallocate. The next one is, of course, the revenue associated with the assessment process. So the obvious question is, what do we think the difference will be between the 4% assessment that we are budgeting for and the 5.7% that we expect? And this is that number, $220,000. Now, if you know our 1% adjustment in tax value, that's not this number. So you can't back into a calculation there. And the reason is because this is adjusted for actual collection. So this is as accurate a number as we can predict. It's likely to be slightly less, it might be slightly more, but this we think is the best estimate we can provide.
Back to slide 51 for just a second. Is this really a revenue increase or an expense reduction?
It's an expense reduction.
Which increases the available money spent. If we post this somewhere, could we consider changing that?
Well, I'm going to show you why we show it as a revenue increase. And the reason is because the proposed budget is already posted. And so the reduction of these numbers results in an allocation of money that needs to be shown somewhere in the budget. Either subtracted as an expense or subtracted as a revenue or added as an expense.
But it's an expense reduction.
Yes, it is.
I know, but it says revenue increase. So if I'm looking at this from the public standpoint, our sources of revenue are fairly limited and specific. And
it's not a new revenue line.
Right.
You're correct.
Okay. Well, whatever. Won't belabor the point.
We'll think of a better way to represent that number. Stammer?
Well, just to reiterate what I think has already been touched on by the mayor, is it's still a moving target, and between now and adoption, these numbers could change.
Yeah.
Will change, I'm sure. Particularly this school operation number.
Yeah.
Also, I guess I should point out, I'm the city's representative on the regional jail board, and that number has not been approved by their board either, so that's still subject to change also. Okay, so this number, the $220,000, is revenue that we can expect to receive after July the 1st and can't be confirmed until at least December. All right, so back to the available revenue number of $123,000 and the needs that we talked about that we've realized since the budget was posted. We have the change in the request for Colonial Behavioral Health. So that new budget number that they sent in was about 20% of their original request. We applied that same 20% to the original Old Town Medical and Dental Center request, and it equaled out to be about $4,000. So we're showing here an award of about $4,000 toward their original request to the Human Services Advisory Board. In addition to that is the $5,500 needed by the Soil and Water Conservation District, the $11,000 for the Commonwealth Attorney, and the $2,400 for the joint courthouse cost increase. If you awarded all of those monies as part of the adopted budget, you would be left with $97,000. Part of that revenue that we did not expect to have as a result of that decrease in expense that we could, just a proposed solution, set aside in the budget in a new line called budget stabilization. And so that $97,000 could be part of a number that would contribute to the reserve at the end of the fiscal year. So an amount that we could count on that would grow the reserve. So that's just a suggestion. Next, I wanted to talk about the future. So some of the issues that we know are going to be coming up. And the first category are things to watch. So these are the trends that we know are going to be impacting future budgets that we should be mindful of and planning for. The first one is the decreasing annual surplus. We've talked about it at the retreat at length. I won't belabor the point again today. As you know, we have historically had numbers that exceeded 2.6 million at the end of the fiscal year in surplus. And last year, our number was 1.5, largely due to unanticipated revenue, not due to savings in expenses. And this year, the number is going to be even less than that. We're anticipating 784 at the time of the printing of the budget. Right now, it looks like maybe in the neighborhood of around $500,000. So this is a concern. And it's not a concern because having a surplus is necessary to the operating budget. It's a concern because our budget has, for a long time, the health of our budget has been based on that surplus contributing to the reserve and contributing to the capital improvement plan. And so when you lose that kind of contribution on an annual basis, we need to have a plan to make up for it. So then the second item plays right into that, and that is the reserve and the decrease in that balance and the need to start planning for how we're going to build that balance back up. The third are the flat revenues. We talk a lot about revenues in tourism being on the wane, and what we're seeing is that that's not necessarily the case. They're flat. They're not increasing by leaps and bounds. In fact, if you adjusted them for inflation, maybe there is a decrease. But they're certainly not increasing by a large margin. And so we need to be mindful of that and planning for it. And then the fourth trend, of course, is the cost of education on our budget and how we can be better partners with James City County and the school system to plan for that moving forward.
Can I make one more? I'm sorry. I think it's important to note that the third and the fourth are major contributors to the first and the second. And the third is why this council felt that Tourism Development Fund was so important to invest in the tourism infrastructure to help drive additional tourism business to help support 1 and 2. I mean, that's the end goal, to increase the revenue coming in.
Right. We're being proactive and taking steps to address these already. So things to consider, these are some steps that we might consider taking that would address some of these, not solutions. I was careful not to propose them that way, but these are things that might help us. The first, we've already talked about, and if we're able to address it this year, I think that's a good step in the right direction, and that would be instituting a budget stabilization line in the budget that would capture an amount of new unanticipated revenue as a result of growth in revenue to go toward the reserve at the end of each fiscal year, in addition to whatever surplus there might be. So if you think back to that slide that I was just showing of how to deal with the reductions from reduced expenses at the jail and reduced contributions to the education operational expense, if we were able to create that this year and put $100,000 in that line, that's a good step in the right direction. Secondly is it's exactly the same principle on the capital improvement side for school planning. We know we've got major capital expenses on the school side. Luckily, we've got those budgeted at the moment. But we know that those are not the only ones that are going to come up, and so the more that we can budget for them now, the better that we will be when they do come. And so if we can institute a process by which we take a percentage of growth in the sales tax that comes into that fund and put into a long-range planning source of money, it'll make those painful additions to that capital fund much less painful. Thirdly is sort of an easy one to do. It's one that the staff already intends to do, starting with the next fiscal year budget, and that is to take what we already do on the capital improvement plan side, which is a 5-year planning horizon, and apply that to the general fund. So the 53 plus meetings I said we had to plan and deliver this budget, we would, at the same time that we have those meetings, not only be talking about the next fiscal year, but be talking about the next 4 fiscal years and the next 5 fiscal years. And what that will do is not let us be able to predict every possible need that might come up, but certainly let us be more nimble so that we can adjust to the big expenses that the department heads can anticipate. And then the fourth one is a tie-in to the GIOs, and certainly one that I think is extremely critical, and that is renewing our strategic planning process. By reviving our vision for the city and establishing new goals that reflect that vision, we will have a source of guidance to turn to when new projects are proposed that are not in the current budget, and determine how important those projects should or should not be relative to funding concerns. Right now, we don't have that guidance, and I think that as we move further into budget constraints, that's going to be a critical need. So fulfilling the 2-year GIO goal of doing that renewed strategic planning is going to be a major step forward. So what does all this mean? I think the future overall for the city is very bright. I think that the city's financial health is excellent, certainly compared to the state. If you remember at the retreat, I showed you a slide that showed you how we compared to cities across the state, and we're right at the top of the list. Our theme, if you followed along through the budget message, has been sort of a garden theme of planting the seeds and tending the fruits that are born, and I think we're going to be very proud of what we are able to deliver with the budget this year. And with that, Mr. Mayor, it's my honor to offer to the City of Williamsburg's 2020 fiscal year budget for adoption by the City Council.
Thank you, Mr. Trivette. It's very colorful, by the way. Come to my colleagues for any questions.
Sure. Drew, great job, but there was another slide with a schedule with the rest of the process.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if you wanted to show that or spare us more of your presentation, but let me begin by saying thank you and to city staff for preparing this budget process. It's an arduous process, beginning with department heads, many meetings with stakeholders, and eventually delivering it to city council. And it's probably the most important thing we'll do because it speaks to implementing our policy visions that we always articulate on this dais. So appreciate your hard work on that. Lots of good stuff. I think one of the recurring themes that I have heard, even as a student in undergrad, was talking about resiliency from predecessors to our more respected predecessors on this dais. I think in different times, but I think that theme is still constant throughout. And one thing to speak out to as you're going through the budget presentation, I'm noticing that even back then when we'd seen historic surpluses of $2.6 million, we've had our predecessors lay the foundations of that resiliency so that when we come to situations like what we have now, I'm sure they haven't anticipated that we see less than 2.6 million, but we are still able to carry out the quality of services, the visions that we have laid out that our citizens share with us. So that's really promising. I think you've done a great job in terms of starting to evolve, or as you say, renew certain strategic planning processes and other processes to make sure that more or less we can still fulfill the same vision and the same quality of services to our citizens. So I think that's important to articulate. I do echo you with the budget stabilization, rebuilding our reserves. I think it's incredibly important, especially with the trends with declining surpluses. The mayor has already pointed out, we have implemented and passed the Tourism Development Fund with the hopes of renewing efforts to with the hopes of, with the infrastructure investment that we make, those crucial investments will hopefully bring it back to what we've seen with the tourism economy. But in the meantime, given that how it's still a very new process, it's kind of what you were saying before, we're kind of baking the cake and it's going to be a little bit messy. At the same time, I think instituting these processes, the budget stabilization, rebuilding the reserves, rethinking certain strategic planning frameworks, that's going to be critical as we continue massaging the Tourism Development Fund, that policy, and seeing the varied successes in later years. Let me begin by asking, with the reserves, I think this is really, really early on in the presentation, but we have that 35% policy. You and Ms. Dameron want to aim for 40%. Any particular reason with that number, with the 5% increase? Is it just 40 is a rounded out number, or is that aligned with more financial practices that?
I think it's just good measure that you don't want to be right at your 35%, because if there's another recession or some kind of unexpected expenditure that comes up, you don't want to break your own policy, even though 35 is a very, very high, particularly if you look across the state at what others have. But if our policy is 35, we don't want to break that. So we need some margin above that to be able to deal with unanticipated expenditures or reductions in revenue.
It's sort of an opportunity window also. You know, just like in your own finances, an opportunity comes up, a wise investment, and you want to be able to take advantage of it. The same thing happens in local government. You know, a regional partnership opportunity comes forward, you want to be able to participate and not be at 35% and have to decline because it would violate your policy.
Right. In terms of with the tourism fund, can we go back to that slide with the contingency funding? So my understanding was that we don't have to spend up to the 10% administrative line item. That's something that when we talked about the TDF, we don't have to rehash that. My understanding was that the expenses that we were going to incur for that position, the ones that didn't end up being used with that 10% was going to just roll back to the tourism fund reserves. So is that the same thing as what was intended with the contingency funding item, or are we changing that concept now?
That worked. Yes. So
just to be clear,
the contingency line that's shown here on this page,
yeah,
that's there so that as we go through this first year of operation, we can draw from that on things that we might need that we didn't budget for, and then anything that's left would roll into the other source of funding.
Right.
So it would not add to the administrative costs that are available next year.
Right, and that's something I had mentioned earlier, and I'll give credit to Councilmember Maslin, is the whole idea with this and not coming from, let's say, the Economic Development Department, is that we protect the general fund stuff with general fund. This one is just coming from Tourism Fund. That's consistent with what we talked about with the Tourism Development Fund when we considered the policy. For those folks who are wondering why can't we just share all those resources, I've had that been asked before. That's the reason why. And that was a great point that you've made, Councilmember Maslin. I might have to come back with other questions. I mean, I'm still processing the entire thing, so.
And let me just point out, you know, this is not our last opportunity to discuss this. We're going to have a public hearing on Thursday, and council will have discussion following that public hearing, which would be a good time to also think about what adjustments you might want to see. And I'd also encourage each of us to talk to colleagues so that if somebody does have adjustments they want to make to the budget, that nobody's surprised. Ms. Ramsey?
Well, I don't have any questions. I think sort of to your point and to what Drew was saying, that this is a review, and also as far as the tourism fund goes, this is the first year for the fund and for the TDF, and we don't know exactly how everything's going to roll out. So I think it's wise sort of keeping that contingency there. And when we came up with the 10% as an idea for the administrative fee, I believe that that's considered sort of the standard or norm in other municipalities. So it's not that we're going outside of that. The only thing I would say is I appreciate the injection of color and design, and it makes it, for me, a lot easier. I don't know if I can say it's enjoyable read, and I'm going to bring it out when, when I'm looking for something to just sort of page through, but I do appreciate that it is easier to read and digest.
Yeah, thanks. I think this was a great presentation, and I was in the audience last year, and remember somebody watching at home, and it was something that was said, and they drove over here running to make a comment. So
Next door neighbor.
I'm sort of waiting to see if we get any of that. A couple questions, though, in terms of things I'm not sure if it's to consider or to be aware of. How are you treating the costs that may come up from library and from redevelopment and housing authority? How would we be addressing those if we see additional costs?
Okay, so let's start with redevelopment and housing authority. We know that as we move into not this fiscal year 20, but fiscal year 21, we will absolutely have new costs in the city budget associated with additional support for the housing authority. At this point, though, we were not prepared to really reflect that because Mr. Franklin is just, frankly, he's too new to really have a plan. Their budget is sustaining at the moment, and we have been able to help them by providing in-kind service. What you can't see is that, as an example of support, the Public Works Department, particularly in our facilities maintenance arena, we are providing some assistance for management of their maintenance operations, and that's been a tremendous help for their operations. So we're doing sort of small things that you can't really see on that front, but I think you can expect bigger changes as we move into fiscal year 21's budget. And I think that you'll be talking about that a lot more as a housing authority board as you move toward their next budget, which will happen before our next budget. As it relates to the library, the costs that I guess what you're talking about is if we were going to discuss a new facility or a remodel of the existing facility. So in the CIP right now, there is a line for that project, and it has $60,000 in it for things that might come up during the year, particularly studies or design work relative to that project. What we have said, at least to the board, is that we have to get through our public safety projects at least to the point where we know their disposition. And we've made one of two major decisions relative to that, and that has to do with the siting of the fire station. We now need to make similar decisions with the police station before we can really make any concrete decisions on what space might be available for a library project. And until we can make that decision, it's impossible for us to put any real context to a library discussion that would generate true cost. And so, as I said to Mr. Zhang, having a 40% reserve affords you the ability to participate when opportunity comes up. That's exactly the type of opportunity that I was talking about.
Thank you.
Is that good? Okay. I think I spoke enough during the presentation, so I'll refrain from coming here and then just say thank you for Dameron, everybody on city staff. I know everybody participates in this, and it didn't start yesterday. It didn't start last month. It didn't start at the beginning of this year. I mean, this goes back quite some time, so we appreciate all the effort here. Again, we will have the public hearing on Thursday. We welcome public input and comment at that point, and then we will have discussion afterwards. And our plan currently is to vote on the budget at the May meeting.
Right. As Mr. Zhang said, I did have one more slide, and it's the timeline. The important date is that we hope the council will be in a position to adopt the budget in May at their meeting, and that's, of course, contingent upon us being able to make adjustments and get the budget to the position that the council's ready to support it. And if so, then we'll have it ready for adoption in May. following the public hearings on Thursday. I would just like to take the opportunity to say thank you to Ms. Dameron and to Vicki, but particularly Ms. Dameron. I can't tell you how many nights Ms. Dameron spent at the office well past 8 o'clock to try and deliver this budget. Thank you.
Well, let's try to make tonight not one of those.
That's right.
Okay, with that, we have city council communications. Any reports from liaison assignments that council members would like to make? Schedule of meetings. Anything you want to highlight for this month, Mr. Trivette?
I was so absorbed in the budget presentation, I left my schedule of meetings at the office.
Thursday.
We do have a meeting on Thursday. We also have a meeting on Wednesday. With that, we'll just go to open forum. We have one speaker's card. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Shelley. I know it's been a while. You're up, please.
Thank you very much. I am Gary Shelley. I live at 205 Indian Springs Road. Sudden disenfranchisement of William and Mary students 15 years ago taught us much about who we are as a community. It also taught students what they could expect from their city council. The right to register and vote is the most precious right that a citizen has. In the half century that I have lived in Williamsburg, there has been no local issue of greater importance. At the October 14, 2004 City Council meeting, Mayor Zeidler clarified that neither the City Council nor the City Manager supervise the voter registrar. Yet in February earlier that year, just weeks before a City Council election, Mayor Zeidler directed City Manager Tuttle to ask City Attorney Phillips to meet with the voter registrar to formulate questions to ask William and Mary student applicants, after which every student application was denied by the registrar. College President Gene Nickel, a constitutional law expert, was outraged. In an email to students, President Nickel wrote, "This community will be your home for 4 years or more. It is your present center of focus and engagement. The decisions of its civic leaders can have a substantial impact on your lives. I believe that you are full members of this community, entitled to equal rights of political participation, and ready to shoulder the civic responsibilities that are their constant companion." In response, Vice Mayor Clyde Hallman suggested that Nickel might have been wiser to discuss his opinions with community members before issuing a pronouncement. And also in support of the registrar, Mayor Zeidler wrote that she felt that the registrar was fair and consistent, an assertion disputed by students. Students felt abandoned and betrayed by City Council. Rather than praise students for the many significant contributions that they make to this community and fight for student re-enfranchisement, Council, in its 2006 legislative priorities for the General Assembly, requested clarification of requirements of voter registration. David Sievers, a student leader who later became a candidate for City Council in our 2006 election, wrote that he found Council's actions, and I'll quote here, to be feeble at best, underhanded, and unjust at worst. He wrote that, and again I quote, "Clarification of student voting rights is the only one of the city's legislative priorities upon which Council did not take a stance or recommend a course of action. The language calls for clarity. Analogous treatment of another priority would have been to request that the General Assembly seek consensus on tourism funding, for example, rather than strongly urging increased funding. One is left to wonder why Council was not more explicit in its intentions with the voting question." And I'm continue quoting from Mr. Sievers. "It is unfortunate that City Council has not made reinstatement of the rights of students to vote in Williamsburg a priority. If it opposes this noble goal, then it should say so, rather than weakly seeking clarity." Unquote. I speak about this issue from our recent past because there are members of our community who still believe that students should not have the fundamental right to vote and be welcomed into our neighborhoods. I look with optimism to this council to act in the best interests of the city and all of its citizens, and not abide those few who oppose student presence in our neighborhoods. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shelley. If anybody else would like to address council, I'd ask that you come forward now. State your name and address. Keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Seeing no one, I'll close the open forum. Come back to council for a motion.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Burcham, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.